What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network.
Got sound.
Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show here today. And sorry for the late start. We had a little bit of a technical issue that came on up. And thanks to all of my viewers over on YouTube who bore with us patiently while we got through all these technical glitches. And just so that you know, we are working on getting a whole new system of remote broadcast ready to go as of the 1st of February. And we're told not only is it going to be more reliable, it'll also have a higher sound quality. And that, of course, is going to make everything better for everybody. So anyway, it is Friday, January 4th, 2019, Pauhana Friday. The phone lines are now open, 800-313-9443. And getting into the news here, the House of Representatives is really not presenting a positive face to the American people, I think. And apparently last night, the new Michigan Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib spoke to a crowd of supporters over at Move On and basically just railed on President Trump, ending with, and I quote, "We're going to go in there and we're going to impeach the mother. You can fill in the rest." And of course, the crowd cheered. Oh my goodness, yeah, we're gonna get that. And the optics on that are really very, very bad. And as a matter of fact, a lot of Democratic leaders came on out and said that was really not appropriate. First of all, to use that language. Now, they don't have a problem with impeaching President Trump. They absolutely do not. But they definitely think that she made the entire party and the House of Representatives look really bad. And apparently, California Representative Brad Sherman, who introduced the articles of impeachment that are currently in the House against Donald Trump, was shocked by Rashida's commentary. And Costa would tell CNN reporter, it's inappropriate. We have our differences, but we need to set a higher standard. And I absolutely agree. It was a wholly inappropriate thing for her to say. And maybe she's just sort of still on that high of having won and being in the House of Representatives, but a little bit of decorum, because that Congress, both House and Senate, is in fact supposed to represent we the people. And I don't use that kind of language. And I don't get personal with people I disagree with. And I agree we should have a higher standard. Okay, we're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So the House is already getting to work, and they did go ahead and they voted a spending bill without any money for the border wall. And of course, this is a non-starter. Trump's already said he would veto it. Mitch McConnell is saying he will not introduce it into the Senate. This is just grandstanding on the part of Nancy Pelosi, who wants to prove that she's in control, that she's in control of what's going on here. And they had another meeting. Schumer, Pelosi, and Trump had another meeting this morning, which went nowhere. Trump said it was productive. Pelosi and Schumer said it was contentious, which means they got to yelling at each other again, only this time there were no cameras. And Trump came on out and he had a presser, and he made a couple of valid points. One thing that you need to keep in mind, the spending bill has $54 billion in it for foreign aid. That's your money going to, in theory, fix problems in other people's countries, or more than likely to bribe their leadership. So we're talking about a foreign aid budget that's 10 times what Trump wants for the border wall. Now, at one point, there'd been a compromise DHS bill that said we might put $2 billion in for the border wall. Trump appeared to waffle, then he went hardline and said, no, it's the 5.6, it's the 5.6. Sean Hannity had come on out there and said that Trump might offer a compromise where he would go along with amnesty for the DACA immigrants if Schumer and Pelosi would go along with funding the border wall. But Trump finished up his presser basically saying that they're going to work through the weekend and try and come to some kind of an agreement so they can reopen the government. But I don't think it's really going to work. First of all, Schumer and Pelosi, they don't want to negotiate. They're taking a hardline position. There will be no wall, which is amazing because 10 years ago they were both saying, yeah, we got to secure our southern border. And now it's completely reversed. They want those borders open. They want the illegals pouring on in here. And Pelosi is out there saying walls are immoral. It's an immorality. Really? What about the wall around the Vatican? Is that an immorality? What about the wall around the homes you yourself live in? Or the Obamas, or the Clintons? Are those all immoralities? If it's okay to put walls and fences around buildings like, for example, the White House, why is it not okay to put a wall or a fence around our entire country to deal with this problem, which has to be dealt with? And, of course, Schumer is out there saying that, well, let's just get the government going again, and then we'll negotiate further on about getting the wall built. But again, Schumer and Pelosi have made it clear. They're on record as saying absolutely under no circumstances will they allow that wall to be built. Now, they are getting some defections here because over on Fox and Friends yesterday, Democratic Representative Ro Khanna of California encouraged migrants to follow the immigration process. In other words, come here through the legal means. And she said she thinks the southern border must be secured. And she, like Donald Trump and so many others, basically pointed to the murder of that California police officer by an illegal immigrant and debated the merits of sanctuary state policies. Now, what's a lot of people have really missed here, the irony of this, that police officer who was killed by an illegal immigrant was himself a legal immigrant. He had gone through the process. He had gone through all the paperwork. He had become a United States citizen through the legal method, and all he'd wanted to be was a peace officer. So, anyway, the House is also up to a whole bunch of other things. Apparently, Nancy Pelosi has a project where she's introducing a bill that is supposed to be a government overhaul of campaign finance and ethic rules that will expand voting rights. In other words, another attack on keeping the American vote for the American people. But apparently one of these specifics supposedly allocates a pool of taxpayer money to match small dollar donations 6-to-1 to encourage grassroots campaigning. In other words, to use taxpayer dollars to basically increase funding to these small little made-up groups that are out there pushing for things like open borders. Now, the package is not going to pass the Senate. The Senate is going to stand firm against the House abuses. But the idea of government-financed campaigns means the state is allowed to allocate money to preferred parties and campaigners, while dissuading non-preferred. And it's been very popular in progressive circles. They basically want the government to be in a position to control the public debate, just as the government controls the corporate media and the government is trying to control the independent media. But if you look at how the IRS was targeting conservatives under Obama, I think the idea of any kind of government funding of political dialogue is a very, very dangerous situation. Other bills the Democrats introduced at the House of Representatives, one is to eliminate the Electoral College, and the other is to stop presidents from pardoning themselves or members of their family. And Representative Stephen Cohen, Democrat of Tennessee, introduced these bills on the first night, and they're both aimed at Donald Trump. Now, the bill to eliminate the Electoral College, that requires a change to the Constitution, an amendment. And again, I think they're grandstanding. I don't think it's going to go through the Senate. Trump is not going to sign it. And even if by some weird confluence of bizarre incidents. It passed the Senate and Trump signed it. It still has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. And the reason the Electoral College exists is so that the future fate of the entire country is not decided by just California, New York, and Texas, the most populous states, and leaving the least populous states out there with nothing to say. That's the purpose of the Electoral College. But that's never going to get anywhere. Now, as far as this law to stop presidents from pardoning themselves or their family, it's never really been established one way or the other whether that's possible. But I think this edges dangerously close to violating the separation of powers doctrine, where Congress is now intruding on the authority and powers of the executive branch, and they're not really supposed to do that. So this one may wind up as a Supreme Court challenge somewhere down the road. But again, it's all grandstanding. They're going out with one of these, with all of these bills that are going to go nowhere, like the spending bill without the wall, ending the Electoral College, making sure Trump can't pardon himself. And again, they keep forgetting Trump's going to veto every single one of them, at which point the corporate media is going to say, oh, well, Trump must be afraid of something. He refuses to sign that bill saying that he can't pardon himself or his family. So it's all for show. They're already thinking 2020. We just got into 2019. We just had the midterms. They're already thinking the 2020 elections. And there's apparently nobody left in that entire building who's actually thinking about working for the American people and all the problems this country has to deal with. Now, Nancy Pelosi announced last night she has selected Representative Adam Schiff, Democrat from California, to chair the House Intelligence Committee for the next 2 years. And it's basically kind of funny seeing Adam, who used to talk about the fact that acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker was not approved by the Senate, but never mentioning the fact that Bob Mueller, who is clearly highly conflicted, was never approved by the Senate. So we'll see what's going to happen with that here. Here's an article that came on out from Investment Watch blog, and it's basically talking about is there a plot by establishment Republicans against Trump? Now, there's no question the Democrats, they're all in lockstep. They want him gone. They hate him with this gut level visceral reaction, which does not lead to good decision making. But apparently never Trumper conservatives are trying to co-opt the MAGA movement's audience. And we're starting to see a change where grassroots conservatives, well, we know they're being erased from social media, but the never Trumpers, they're not being censored by Facebook, Google, or Twitter. They're still out there. So it's a concerted effort, and it seems to be tied up with the globalists. The globalists absolutely hated Trump. Remember back when he introduced the concept of Make America Great Again, and everybody went ballistic. They even called it racist. It's racist to want to make America great. No, it isn't. It's patriotic to want to make your country better. There's nothing wrong with wanting to make your country better. Last week, there was a bit of a kerfuffle between Mitt Romney and Donald Trump because Mitt Romney wrote this scathing op-ed in the New York Times, basically saying that Trump was failing to live up to the mantle of being the president, which, if you look at how he's constantly under attack, I can imagine how he might be wanting to keep his head down, so to speak here. But apparently, not only is Romney taking heat from Trump, he's taking it from his own niece, Ronna McDaniel, who also happens to lead the Republican Party. And she came on out and said, again, it's like that congresswoman who used the bad word in her impeachment message. It's inappropriate. And it's inappropriate. It's counterproductive. Over in Massachusetts, Democratic Senate candidate Elizabeth Warren is in hot water yet again. Now, as you know, everybody has nicknamed her Pocahontas because she basically grew up claiming to be Native American, to have Cherokee blood. She used it to help get into college. And she even wrote a book called Pow Wow Chow. And I'm not kidding you. Now, because she's a Democrat, she got away with that. Can you imagine a Republican writing a book called Pow Wow Chow? They tear him apart. Oh, cultural appropriation. It's racist. You know, it's stereotype and all the rest of it. Well, the book was supposed to be the recipes that Elizabeth had inherited from her forebears. And now that we know there were no Cherokee forebears, it turns out the recipes in the book Pow Wow Chow were plagiarized from other publications, including the New York Times. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And a quick little reminder, I was going to mention this at the top of the show, but we had that little delay getting in here. The lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 of today, which those of you on YouTube could probably already guess because I have her chair already set up here. All right, so we're talking about the new incoming House of Representatives and some of the bizarre behavior that we're starting to see, like profanity and lack of dignity, and filing of all kinds of bills which have no chance at all of succeeding, but are being done for media impact and scoring points. And apparently, Democratic Virginia Representative Jennifer Wexton, who's a freshman congresswoman, outside of her Capitol Hill office, there are 3 flags. There is a flag of the state of Virginia, there's a flag of the United States, and there's a transgender flag, which I was not even aware there was an official transgender flag, but apparently there is one, and it is now up there on Capitol Hill. Donald Trump is looking at nominating James Webb as the next Secretary of Defense. The bad news is that James Webb is a known China hawk. He wants us to go after China. We have to seize control of that Western Pacific because, you know, that should be ours because it reaches all the way to California and therefore it should all be ours here. So Webb served as Secretary of the Navy under Ronald Reagan. He was a critic of the 2003 invasion of Iraq. And of course, his first task, if he is confirmed, his first task will be to implement Trump's promised U.S. troop withdrawals from Syria and Afghanistan. Maybe, because Trump appears to be walking back on that Syria pullout. And a lot of people are wondering exactly what is really going on. Now, he announced the pullout, said it was going to be 30 to 100 days. Now he's denying that he had a timetable and said it's going to take several months. Then we get these other reports about how the U.S. is building new bases inside Syria, pointedly without the permission of the Syrian government, and they're sending more hardware in there. So everybody's trying to figure out what's going on. But again, all of this happened right after the visit from Lindsey Graham. And once again, it shows that Trump, unfortunately, is very weak, and he's unable or unwilling to stand up to the pressure being brought to bear on him. Now, over at Chuck Baldwin's website, he's basically decided it's not going to happen. He's out there saying there's no troop pullout. It's basically a lie. He's pulling the wool over the eyes of millions of conservatives, Christians, and of course the American people as a whole. Now, over at Israel-Palestine News, they're convinced Trump means what he's saying, and the plan to pull out of Syria enrages pro-Israel chicken hawks. Now, the U.S. press is still pushing an illegal and unconstitutional invasion of Syria, whose stated primary objective, at least this week, is to remove a terrorist organization which is already pretty much gone. And of course, we know that the real goal is regime change. They want Assad out. So there's no way to win, and there's no exit strategy. And I think the only reason they're still pushing to stay in Syria is they don't want to admit, as Trump has already done, Syria is lost. Because then the momentum for the war agenda stumbles badly. If we've lost in Syria and Afghanistan, then everybody's going to pull back and say, whoa, let's rethink this whole going into Iran, going up against China and Russia thing. Another article, this from Sputnik News, saying how the regional powers in the Middle East are already making their plans as to what they're going to do after the U.S. withdrawal from Syria. And they comment on the fact that Trump is waffling back and forth about the timetable, as well as whether the U.S. really would be leaving. So everybody is making plans and repositioning. And again, Israel's very unhappy because they want Syria destroyed, they want Assad out, but they don't want to have to do it themselves. That's what the Americans are for. When Israel wants a war, it's the Americans' place in life to pay for it and send soldiers here. Anyway, over at Idlib, apparently the intra-militant struggle is really cranking up. And this is where we have all these different faction groups, many of which are supported or were supported by the United States. Now they're fighting amongst each other for control of Idlib. And I'm sure that the Syrian forces are just standing back and saying, good, let them kill each other. And then we'll go on in and just mop up that operation. Okay, we have to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the war zones. And interestingly enough, the U.S. government, the Pentagon, has decided now that the F-35s may need upgrading in response to the deployment of S-300 missiles to Syria. And apparently the Pentagon has decided that additional tests are now needed for the F-35 to make sure it's really as stealthy as it's supposed to be, out of concern that the plane may not actually be that invisible to Russia's S-300 missiles. So, again, trillion-dollar boondoggle. Now, a few weeks ago, actually about a month ago, there was a story where a Russian pilot was able to get a radar lock on an American F-22. And you need to understand that stealth has its limits. It can be defeated by more powerful radar, and stealth is generally designed for a specific radar band. And it's been discovered that by going to other bands, in particular lower frequency ones, you can defeat it. And clearly the Pentagon is worried that the F-35 may not be that stealthy, and they're going to do these additional tests. Because ever since the S-300 showed up, have you noticed that nobody has flown an F-35 into Syria? And the reason for that is purely economic. If just one of those planes gets shot down, then the customers for that aircraft are just going to disappear, because its main selling point is being stealthy. It's not a high-performance aircraft. It's not a dogfighter. It can be beaten by 1970s vintage fighters. The high-tech whiz-bang stuff, for the most part, still isn't working properly. It's a boondoggle. And right now the U.S. is trying to convince our allies and our friends, you must buy our F-35. It's a wonderful aircraft. And if it comes on out that it can be shot down by the S-300 or the S-400 or the coming S-500, that changes the business plan somewhat dramatically here. The U.S. is still trying to arm twist Turkey to cancel their planned purchase of the Russian S-400 missile air defense system, and apparently they're trying to link it to the sale of the Patriot missile system that Ankara wants. And so what the U.S. is saying is, well, you can't have them both. You can have one or the other. You can have ours, or you can have theirs. And right now, the relationship between Turkey and the United States is very much up in the air because of what's going on over in Syria, in the Kurdish regions. And nobody's really sure who's on whose side just yet. Erdogan is a wild card, primarily because of the fact that he thinks the United States was involved in that failed attempt to remove him from power a few years ago. And the fact that the cleric that Erdogan says was the mastermind for this is still living in the United States under U.S. protection. Although now there's talk that he may be sent back to Turkey, which shows you how much the United States believes in loyalty to those who serve their interests here. Now, Iran is getting ready to launch a series of 3 space launch vehicles. They want to put satellites into orbit. They have every right to do so. But Mike Pompeo is out there saying, well, you know, Iran can't do that because these space launch vehicles incorporate technology that is identical to that used in intercontinental ballistic missiles, and that would violate UN Security Council Resolution 2231. Now, UN Resolution 2231 endorsed the 2015 nuclear deal, which did not get into the issue of the missiles. It was all about Iran's nuclear reactors, about their enrichment plant, and Iran went along with it. But don't forget, Trump has pulled out of it. And so Iran's foreign minister Zarif is saying, you left the deal. You're not in any position to lecture Iran on UN Resolution 2231. It's no longer any of your business. Iran has also sent messages to the neighboring nations in the Middle East, basically requesting that they do not invite the United States to the Persian Gulf, and basically saying that the United States will come on in and they'll be hatching plots against Iran and not eventually plots against the other countries. I mean, look how many of those Middle Eastern countries the United States has gone into and mucked about. Yemen, Libya, Syria. There aren't that many nations in the Middle East. The rest of them got to be getting a little bit nervous. So now it's like we've got what, 700 plus military bases around the world. We're currently involved in Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Yemen, several places in Africa. According to Bernie Sanders, we're involved in military actions in 77 nations around the world. Some of them very, very small, but still. And despite warnings from the Pentagon that we are in fact stretched a little thin militarily, apparently the United States has decided it's time to step up their involvement in Latin America because we have to counter Russia and China. Russia and China are gaining influence in Latin America. Well, they're coming on in. They're doing business. They're building infrastructure. They're doing trade. So U.S. Air Force Chief of Staff General David Goldfein told Foreign Policy in a November interview, when it comes to China and Russia, we're looking at cooperation where we can and pushing back aggressively where we must. Now, the United States historically has always viewed Latin America, in fact, all of South America, as kind of their turf. And they've never been shy about going on down there and mucking about with those countries, such as the 1973 overthrow of Chile's democratically elected President Allende and his replacement with the dictator Pinochet. And the U.S. has played very dirty with a lot of those South American countries, and that's why they don't like the United States, unless they can come and live here, of course. But they don't like the U.S. government and its behavior. But now the U.S. is getting ready to go on back down there, and we're going to go on in there, because if anybody is going to go and do business with Russia and China, with South America, it's going to be us. We don't have anything to sell that they want to buy. But the U.S. is getting some cooperation. Brazil's newly sworn-in president, Jair Bolsonaro, has said he might consider hosting a U.S. military base in the future, and called a Brazilian embassy move to Jerusalem a done deal in a new interview on Thursday. Then apparently, this is being countered by Professor Ari Kakowicz, an expert on Latin America from the Department of International Relations at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, saying that the Brazilian embassy is not going to move to Jerusalem. So I'm so confused. I have no idea. Israel would like Brazil to do that. Arab leaders have condemned it. They're now applying pressure to Brazil to not go through with it at all. I look at all of this and I keep being reminded of that wonderful movie, Kingdom of Heaven. It was directed by Ridley Scott. He's an amazing director. And one of my regrets is that for the entirety of my film career, I never got to work with him. I never even got to meet him. But the Kingdom of Heaven is all about the fall of Jerusalem during the Crusades. And at the very end, the Saracens have surrounded Jerusalem. And Balian comes on out to have a parley with Salahuddin and says, basically, if you try and take Jerusalem by force, we'll burn it to the ground. Every rock, every stick, everything that drives men mad. And Salahuddin says, I wonder if that would not be best. It's the best line in the entire movie. If you have not seen it, it's out there. Find it on Hulu or Netflix. It is really a well-done movie. Great art direction as well. Getting on back to the modern world and away from motion pictures. The Yellow Vests are still going strong over in France. Macron's government is apparently starting to tremble. And one of his top advisors just quit. But the Yellow Vest movement is starting to spread worldwide. It's in Belgium, the Netherlands, it's in Canada. In fact, it's all over Canada. Toronto, Halifax, Edmonton, Saskatoon, Calgary, Alberta, Saskatchewan. I think as we get out of this coming hard winter and into spring, it's going to spread everywhere. Although it hasn't really seemed to gain a lot of traction here in the United States. Now, I know there's a Yellow Vest protest coming up at the California State Capitol in Sacramento, but I haven't really seen it pretty much anywhere else. And mea culpa maxima, I haven't gone down and bought my Yellow Vest yet either. But I think it may. I think it may, because France and the United States were in kind of the same situation. We were told by the corporate media that the Yellow Vests were all about fuel prices. But no, if you look at the actual list of the demands by the Yellow Vests, it's improving the standard of living, closing the borders, an end to austerity, all kinds of legitimate grievances. They're sick and tired of working very hard and having it all taken away by the elites. And in many ways, it is very much similar to the situation France was in before the first French Revolution. And it's very similar to what we're seeing here in this country. Over in Nablus, Israeli soldiers opened live fire and tear gas bombs targeting Palestinian students while they were leaving their school in the northern occupied West Bank village of Tel in Nablus. Palestinian security sources said that Israeli settlers attacked Palestinian vehicles passing by the main Nablus-Kalgilia road near the illegal Israeli settlement of Yitzhar. And they're just shooting here, and I think nothing illustrates that better than this story. This is out of B'Tselem.org, where apparently Israeli forces shot and killed 3 Palestinians, claiming they had basically driven through a checkpoint and intentionally ran over Israelis. And unfortunately, the next day, the military announced that the car, in fact, had not broken through the checkpoint and no Israelis had been run over. They just shot and killed these 3 Palestinians for something that did not happen. So we're looking at wars here, wars there, and we need to remember wars do not begin with the declaration of war and end with the declaration of victory. The run-up to war precedes it for quite some time, and the aftermath can last a long time. And apparently over in France, in the Somme battlefields, they are still cleaning up that mess. In 2016 alone, bomb disposal experts collected 25 tons of ammunition from the Somme battlefields. And experts are saying it'll probably take hundreds of years before the area can be declared safe. We have a lot of that same stuff out here in Hawaii. At the end of World War II, they dumped unused ammunition just off the coast here. And it's marked on the maritime charts. No drag netting here. Careful dropping your anchors here. Okay, and let's see. Oh, we are not getting messages. We have callers on the line. Boy, this... Okay. Yeah, the Twitch text window has stopped working. All right, so let's take Jim in Michigan. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Happy New Year, my friend.
Happy New Year.
I guess I just like, well, thank you so much. And to your beautiful wife there, too. I had my daughter and her boyfriend, which is he's a gentleman. He's the best guy that she's ever been with, over for Christmas. And we did somehow get on the topic of global warming. And his background is physics, okay, as far as college is concerned. So I guess the conversation, and I really shouldn't have even been in the conversation because I don't have that much scientific knowledge behind me. To actually prepare for a discussion like we had, it would take me 2 or 3 weeks of, researching the whole thing. But what it came down to, I guess, was the fact that he said, as a physicist, that the science is there, that it's undeniable that we have global warming.
Well, it's very deniable. The Earth is actually cooling. And this next week in Great Britain, we're going to see some major cold, wet weather. Even NASA is now admitting that, yes, the Earth is starting to cool. And if you read my ClimateGate article, you will see that the scientists who are desirous of funding and media attention are always out there saying, oh, we're on the edge of a new ice age, or we're on the edge of this or that. Climate is always going to be climate, and the human impact on it is microscopic. It's a fashionable, trendy thing to be involved in. Oh, yes, I'm opposed to climate change. Really? How are you going to stop nature dead in its tracks? Because that's what climate is. It's part of nature.
And, and you have a point, too, but if you look at the math, okay, what they use as a scale to figure out the upcoming trends as far as global warming, the science is correct. But here's the deal. Because he's a physicist, he's using calculations that the mainstream puts over. But if you look at, are you familiar with Lord Monckton?
Yeah, I am, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to let you go because we got to do a commercial break, and I got a bunch of saved up calls here. Suffice it to say, those charts you're being shown are from computer models, not actually field collected data. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Let's grab some more phone calls here. And again, I apologize to all of you for not getting to you, but our communication system, which is going to be replaced, okay, the text window has quit working for some reason. And anyway, Al in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I had no problem at all listening to you in the last segment. I mean, you were on fire.
No, the audio is working just fine, but there's also supposed to be a text window through which I can communicate with our board op, who tells me when there are people waiting on the phone lines, and apparently that has simply quit working, and apparently Twitch is going to stop supporting voice and video as of February 1, and that's what's forced our hand to get a new system.
Yeah, I guess there's no money to be made in telling the truth.
No, there isn't.
You know what?
I can attest to that.
Well, Mike, I'm telling you, you have that, you're there. You should consider getting into politics. I know you're at the quote-unquote retiring age, but in my opinion, I think you're at the age where you can do a lot of good for a lot of people. I originally phoned in to talk about when you were talking about war. And the United States war budget is just insane. It's huge. All the ancillary, businesses and it costs and everything else. But anyways, if peace were to actually break out in the U.S. government internally and on foreign soil, Mike, what would those war profiteers do?
They'd look to start another war. I mean, that's what keeps them in business. They don't want peace any more than the medical industrial complex wants health. Their money is in conflict, and if they can't get one, they'll make one. I mean, if you go back and you look at the history of World War I, you get there was this German family. They're very, very wealthy. I'm blanking on the name of it, but they were industrialists and they were weapons makers, and they were into a bunch of other things. The Krupps. The Krupp family, and they're still around today, although today they make coffee pots and things like that. And they were very heavy players in politics, trying to manipulate the war because they wanted to sell the weapons. And you're always going to see the owners of weapons companies out there saying, we've got to go to war over here. And my concern is how many members of our Congress have stock portfolios just loaded up with stocks from the defense contractors, and that's why they're out there saying, yes, let's go up against China, let's go up against Russia, let's send our kids over the entire globe and try and take it all over. They're making money. Even if we were to lose the war, they would come out very rich at the end of it.
Yes, well, in fact, a huge part of the United States economy is war-driven.
Yes, sadly it is.
Crazy.
Sadly it is.
It is. I mean, wow. The amount of cash that you don't even have that goes into it is amazing.
It is, and and it's all borrowed, and our great-great-grandchildren are expected to pay it off. Al, got to let you go. We got to do a station break, and we'll be back with more phone calls after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show today, hour number 2. The phone lines are open at 800-313-9443. And boy, what a bad tech day we're having here on this Pauhana Friday. So let's go back to the phones here, and let's see. I need to say, Al in West Virginia. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
No, we lost Al.
We lost Al. Do we have somebody called We Lost at West Virginia?
No, that was Al.
That was Al. Okay, Joe in Tennessee. Let's go to Joe in Tennessee. Joe, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm really, this whole thing with this Michigan congresswoman just shows the Trump magic. Everybody that tries to come after him, it ends up blowing up in their face. It's just amazing how fast it happened. I mean, to have a Muslim woman who swore in on Thomas Jefferson's Quran, like cloaking herself in religious garb, to say those kind of words in front of her kids, too, her 8-year-old kid, about the president, whether you like the president or not, you expect her to honor the dignity of her representation of the Muslim faith. She ought to. If she goes to Saudi Arabia, she'll probably get stoned. The embarrassment she was to the Muslim people.
Well,
but
hang
she's not
on,
really
hang on. Slow down for a little second. Slow down for a second, because I did a little work. I wanted to check in on this, and apparently, Islam does not really have a specific prohibition regarding obscenity, and it's in poor taste. There's no question about it. And for that matter, most religions don't have those kind of prohibitions. They're usually added on afterwards by moralist people. But there's no question that it was in poor taste. It was undignified. It's demeaning to the image of the United States Congress. But were she to go to the Middle East, no, she would not be stoned for it.
Well, I don't. First of all, women in the Middle East and the Muslim, Saudi Arabia, the Wahhabist areas, wouldn't even be allowed to talk, let alone curse publicly like that as a politician. And they probably would be stoned in that radical areas of the Middle East for sure. But what I'm saying is that she's not really a Muslim. She's a radical fanatic who just cloaks herself in religion. She's obviously, if she's a religious person, she's not going to be throwing the MF bomb out, especially in front of her children.
Yes.
So she's been exposed. I think she just totally destroyed her career. I mean, she might get reelected, but as far as getting on television or like any kind of major seat, she's just blown herself up. She just committed basically a political suicide bombing, and I'm glad to see it. And I think this is what you're going to see more of, because the Democratic Party just put in a bunch of unhinged social justice warrior, radical, crazy, and they're just totally suffering from Trump derangement syndrome. We're going to call him a Nazi. He's not a Nazi. They're so out of touch with middle America. This is going to, Pelosi's major issue is going to be putting out fires like this. Here she is, born in. They should be celebrating this whole thing for a few days, and this crazed radical Democrat goes and just screws the whole thing up for him. And I'm just enjoying the heck out of it. And, it's just, every week there's going to be another one, Cortez or this lady or some other crazy that they just put in. So, it's great. Trump has very good luck in who his enemies are, I must say. And I'm really going to enjoy the show. And I really wonder why Mitch Romney isn't out there criticizing this lady for her language. He's Mr. Manners with Trump. And where is he? I don't. Then it just shows the hypocrisy.
Romney's focused on Trump right now. To me, that op-ed Romney wrote signals he's stepping in 2020. As far as this congresswoman who did the MF thing, we need to keep an eye on her voting record. Because she ran on this idea that she's a Muslim, that she's pro-Palestinian. We need to see if her voting record actually backs that up, or if she's a Pino, which is a Palestinian in name only. And so we have to keep an eye on just how she votes on these issues. Okay?
Yeah, well, I've worked with Arabs and Muslims before. I'm a seaman, and we get guys from Yemen and, Somalia. And most of them are pious. They're decent, hardworking people, and they're not, they remind me really of like conservative Catholic type people in their moral stance with their kids. Their kids are always raised well, disciplined. They're not for abortion. I could imagine them like really being upset by this lady. I mean, she's an embarrassment. She really embarrassed herself, and it's a shame, because I don't like radicals. I don't like crazies. But I have a place that I can, be open-minded to Muslim people. Most Muslims aren't part of this radical craziness, and the radicals embarrass them as a religion, whether it's guys ISIS cutting people's heads off, or radical crazy American women who use the cloak of Islam and go use vulgarity like that. I mean, has anybody ever, a congresswoman ever, or man ever said those words? I've never heard it before.
No, I haven't either. I mean, they may have said them in private, but to say them in a public venue where they're going to wind up on TV, and she was completely unabashed about what she said, and she reveled in the fact that the audience was cheering. And so, but again, it was a disgrace. Anyway, listen, Joe, we're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout out to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. We're going to take 2 more phone calls, and then we're going to close the phone lines because we're trying to deal with all this technical issue, and we may open the phone lines again later in the program. So let's go to Layla in Ontario. Layla, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, the first thing I wanted to address is the reference to Saracens. That is a pejorative term. It was appropriate within the movie, within the context, because it was a historical context. However, in contemporary society, Saracen is a derogatory term. As for that Muslim woman in Michigan, I think Jim is absolutely right. I don't know what the woman said, but no respectable Muslim society would tolerate a woman using any kind of even mild profanity, even in a small social circle, let alone in her exalted position. And if the people were cheering her on, America has a great deal to be worried about.
No
she is
question.
going to be like that woman Sarsour, who is nothing but another radical, murderous troublemaker. And those crazy women have got to be stopped. And now the one other thing I wanted to get to was the possibility of the U.S. becoming involved in Latin America. This is going to sound like a contradiction, but I think it's a good idea. First of all, Israel is very close with Jair Bolsonaro, the head of Brazil, so they probably will set up shop there. There's going to be a lot of turmoil in Central and South America because I don't know if you realize this, there are tons of Palestinians there who went there not because they were chased away by the Zionists in 48 or by the Muslims since then. A lot of them are Christians. They were chased away during the Ottoman Empire. They have been there that long, since the early 1900s and late 1800s, and still consider themselves fanatical Palestinians. So there's going to be a lot of problems there. That's what they're behind. Many of them are behind the caravan that has been moving towards the U.S. Either there's going to be an attack on those that we consider troublemakers in Latin America, and we kill them, or we find some way of dealing with them peacefully. And
well, I prefer peaceful. I prefer peaceful because
exactly because we do have a lot in common, a lot of interests in common, and if those can be built upon, then we're better off. Because if Netanyahu and Israel are going to be setting up shop with Bolsonaro, who's a fanatical Zionist, then it's really important that the U.S. assert itself in Central and South America, because we have huge interests in keeping them peaceful. So that's all I've got to say at this point.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the information. And the reason I use the word Saracen is that's the word that was being used within the movie itself.
Oh, and I know that.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's why I said it was accurate within the movie, and you were correct to quote the movie because that was the line that you were quoting. It was a historical movie, and that's what it's like when they when you have a movie about the Second World War and they're fighting the Germans and they call them Huns or Krauts.
Yes.
We would never say that today, but within the context, it's accurate. Actually, during the British Empire, they used to call the Arabs Wogs.
Yes.
W-O-G.
Yes.
And they also call the Indians Wogs.
Yes.
So, I mean, there are a lot of terms that have evolved over the years to debase other humans. But again,
well,
back
in Vietnam, it was the Gooks,
America.
You know, and
Yes,
Japan,
exactly.
it was
the Gooks, the whatever.
In Germany, it was the Krauts.
It's tragic what we do, the things we do to dehumanize one another. But I think since we have we have a lot of people in Central and South America, and those who are descended of the Palestinians that came to South America during the Ottoman Empire, they became known as Turcos because they had to travel with Turkish passports. They were escaping the Ottoman army that used to kidnap young men and throw them in the front line of its army. So they would take their teenage sons and they would run to South America. Yet, despite that, they are still hostile to Israel. That's what blows me away, even though it was actually the Ottomans that drove them out. But we do have deep ties with South America in the sense that there are a lot of European descendants there, and they are they can be a very industrious people. So it's important, I think, to develop ties with Central and South America before Israel does.
Well, I think if the U.S. is going down to Central and South America, Israel will be in control of that agenda. And if the descendants of Palestinians in South America are still angry with Israel, it's probably because, excuse me a second, they are not allowed to return to Israel because they're not Jewish, and that might be a little bit of hostility there. Anyway, Layla, got to let you go.
I have a lot of hostility because of that, too. I mean, I can't even go back, even though I was born there, and a lot of other people do. However, many of those that have been there since the mid-1800s. For example, Carlos Salim, who owns the New York Times. The reason I think that its stock has gone up is because Carlos Salim, who calls himself Carlos Slim, was really Khalil Salim. They came during the Ottoman Empire to Mexico. He's one of the richest men in the world. My guess is he bought up a lot of the shares on the market in order to elevate the shares of the New York Times. He can afford to do that.
Layla. Okay. One more comment, then I got to let you go because I got to get back to the show here. The stock price of the New York Times was elevated because its readership soared since Trump was elected. But a lot of people are thinking that the readership of the New York Times has shifted hard liberal, and that is why the editorial policy of the New York Times itself has gone hard liberal as well. Anyway, Layla, thank you very much. Have a really good weekend. We're going to take one more phone call here from Robert in London. Robert, thank you for waiting so patiently, and what is on your mind?
Yes, hello. Hi, Mike. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
I have a little theory. I call it the Cousins War. You may ask. A couple of shows ago, you said that Rockefeller had written a negative tweet about Trump, and I was a bit conflicted. And then later on in the show, you said, actually, correction, it was Rothschild who written the negative tweet about Trump.
Yes.
And so that made sense to me. And I like to just quote a little bit of my poem that I wrote some time ago. It says, while Rockefeller rocks with Donald and Rothschild high-fives Hillary, lovable Jamie Dimon dons dollar derivatives that drains us out while they float about on top. So my point is, according to what I can pick up, Rockefeller and Rothschild are cousins. I have no idea whether that's really true or not. If it is true, then the fight between Donald and Hillary and the Democrats is a cousins war. That's my theory.
Well, it's a war among royal families. I mean, think Game of Thrones. And, when you consider that the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the Warburgs and everything were the original owners of the Federal Reserve, they probably palled around together. And, their kids started, marrying each other because they couldn't be allowed to marry the hoi polloi. There's a lot of genealogical information in there that links those families.
So I was going to give an example of the Cousins Wars being the Wars of the Roses in 1455.
Yes.
And also the First World War between George V and Kaiser Wilhelm.
Yes.
And So there's lots of examples of cousins wars.
Yes.
And so, like I say, my theory is I'm speaking from the top of Ben Nevis in Scotland about the Aborigines in Australia, because I have no idea anything about either the Rothschilds or the Aborigines. And it's just, that's my theory. Take it or leave it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the theory, and we're going to let you go. And folks, unless we can get this text window working, we're going to close the phone lines because I'm trying to communicate with the control room via email, and it's just taking away too much here. All right, so let's talk now about the economic news. Obviously, the big headline is the stock markets just had a stellar day. The Dow ended more than 700 points higher, erasing the losses from yesterday and adding a little bit more on top. So the money junkies are happy going into the weekend. They've had that Friday happy ending, which is traditional. And everybody's saying, oh, this is because there's progress on the China trade deal. And this is because there's, there was a good jobs number report, which we all know is made up numbers anyway. But there was a very interesting analysis that was done over at Investment Watch blog. Basically, somebody was tracking the futures market through last night. And apparently, starting at 8 p.m., in whatever time zone they were, the futures just started rocketing upward, meaning somebody was just buying futures like crazy. And that's how it was being done. That was the rescue mission. That's how the rigging is being done. And the reason they know that something was being done by like the plunge protection team or what have you is because at the same time, the price of gold was plummeting in the inverse ramp, meaning somebody was selling gold in order to dump it into the equities market and crank it up back to the top. So as good as this soaring market looks, it is an illusion. It is much as an illusion as the good job numbers and the rate of inflation and the GDP. Because we're in a situation right now where the government is feeling they have to continue to lie to the American people about how great the economy is, how wonderful it's going to be in the near future, because if the American people really came to an understanding of what the economy's condition truly is, there would be rioting in the streets. So anyway, we're going to take a quick break for commercials. We're going to try and pound on machines and get things working, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the economic news here, and despite today's soaring stock market, things are still looking very tenuous. And Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg had planned a sale of billions of dollars worth of his Facebook shares in order to fund his charitable activities and various other things, or at least that's the official story. He's now canceled that and apparently decided to just hang on to it in the hope that it would go back up, which I imagine probably today it did to some extent here. Story coming on out, apparently everyone's still worried about rate hikes by the Federal Reserve. But apparently an analysis over an Investment Watch blog is saying there are now odds that there will be a rate cut come March. And this is based on a technical analysis of the economy, which sort of weights the likelihood of a rate change one way or the other, and the probability of a rate cut is in ascendancy right now. Jacob Rothschild has voiced concern about the global financial system that was established after World War II. The billionaire banker points to the U.S.-China trade war and Eurozone crisis as the key problems putting economic order at risk. And basically, he came on out and said, this is a direct quote, "In 9/11 and in the 2008 financial crisis, the powers of the world worked together with a common approach. Cooperation today is proving much more difficult. This puts at risk the post-war economic and security order," end quote. Now, what he's talking about, of course, is Bretton Woods and the establishment of private central banking for much of the world. And so what he's really worried about is that people are waking up to the fraud of private central banks. And he's very, very concerned, obviously, that more and more countries are no longer using the US dollar as being printed up by the Federal Reserve, of which his family owns a portion. So he's worried the good times may be coming to an end, and they very well might be. Over in Baltimore, there was an analysis about what's going on over there in Zero Hedge, and we keep hearing about how bad things are in Baltimore and how badly it's being run. There is soaring wealth inequality. The rich are very rich, the poor are very poor. There are lots of vacant homes because the population of Baltimore is in decline. And the population has dropped by a third since the late 1950s due to the deindustrialization of the Port of Baltimore. People didn't have jobs. They went elsewhere. And as a result, there are a lot of vacant buildings out there, and there's a lot of poverty. And the areas where the vacant buildings are where the homeless tend to camp out because nobody's going to bother them there. And there are a lot of homicides taking place in those vacant areas as well. Now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has come on out with a new tax recommendation. And it may surprise you. I'm going to come to her defense here because it's being presented as across the board. Oh, she wants this huge tax increase on us all. No, that's not exactly what she said. Let us be accurate and let us be fair. And over at Mediaite.com, what she is proposing, she sat down with Anderson Cooper for an upcoming 60 Minutes interview, which will air on Sunday, so you can double check this for yourself. But basically, she wants the super wealthy to be taxed up to 70% to fund what she calls a Green New Deal. She's going on back to the ghost of Franklin Roosevelt, and she wants to tax the super wealthy up to 70%. But people who earn up to $75,000 a year would pay only 10 to 15% in income tax. Now, to me, it sounds like a good idea. And I'm sure to a lot of people, they're going to say, well, yeah, tax the people who've got the money instead of those of us who are struggling just to get on by. But when Franklin Roosevelt started his New Deal, it created a huge amount of hostility among the banker class, who saw it as an attack on their wealth and privilege. And this was the primary motive. They tried to organize a coup d'etat against Franklin Roosevelt based on the government that Benito Mussolini had set up in fascist Italy. And the Wall Street bankers recruited Major General Smedley Butler, who was one of the most popular military commanders of the age, to sort of get the military in line with a coup d'etat against the government. And Butler pretended to go along with it, pardon me, until he had a huge amount of evidence. And then, to his credit, he blew the whistle. And Roosevelt was, of course, furious, and the bankers said, you can't touch us. If you arrest even one of us, we'll wreck your New Deal economy and we'll put the blame on you. And the whole matter was classified, covered up, hushed up, wasn't declassified until the 1970s. Anyway, we're going to take another break for commercials. We're going to try and get our system back here online. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're still talking about the economic news. Now, over in Boston, which is where I was born, there's a landmark restaurant called Durgan Park. And it's been there forever. It's been there since 1827. It sells clam chowder, pot roast, basically New England Yankee fare. They are having to close their doors as of the 12th of this month, basically saying they've run out of money, the financial pressures. They're also trying to put the blame on increasing minimum wage, but I think the problem is you need to realize that fewer and fewer people go out to eat. That's a reality of our economic situation. People are staying at home. They're doing more of their own cooking. They don't go out to eat anymore. And a lot of restaurant chains are in trouble right now. Over in Italy, their 10th largest bank has now been taken over by the European Central Bank because Italy is now heading into a recession, and I think the whole world is going to follow along. I think we're looking at a global recession, if not an outright depression. Story out of the Telegraph in Great Britain: the euro has failed. It threatens democracy, and it should be abolished. And they're saying, to be charitable, you would say that the euro has proved itself merely by surviving until its 20th birthday, which is this month. That's the low bar. But they're saying that basically the euro and its shackles to the ECB have caused a lot of harm and damage. They've impoverished the EU member nations. Yes, that's what private central banks do. Speaking of impoverishment, Google apparently moved $23 billion to an offshore shell company so that they would not have to pay U.S. or European Union taxes in 2017. And the money was moved via Google Netherlands Holdings BV down to a Dutch shell company in Bermuda. And unfortunately, this is all perfectly legal. The ultra-rich have got access to these tax avoidance things that you, as a wage and salary earner, really have no access to. You don't have enough money to make it work here. Story out of Town Hall. Donald Trump, and the timing on this may be a little bit bad with all the bad blood because of the partial government shutdown. Donald Trump is freezing pay for the civilian federal workers, canceling the automatic 2.1% increase that was slated for this year. This, of course, has resulted in union bosses and Democratic politicians howling and screaming. But if you think about it from the point of view of the American people, this is the right decision because federal workers already collect bigger salaries on average than private sector workers doing comparable jobs. It's anywhere from 1.25% to 1.5%, and they get benefits packages at a whopping 47% more expensive. This is coming from the Congressional Budget Office. Federal civilian workers get up to 49 paid vacation days off a year, and they never have to worry about getting fired because firing a federal worker is almost impossible no matter what they do. Sweet deal. I should have gone into federal service. Okay, getting on to the immigration situation. As you know, Trump and Schumer and Pelosi had a productive, if you're Trump's, or a contentious meeting, if you're Schumer and Pelosi, over this border fence. And it still looks like both are sticking to their positions. Trump wants that $5.6 billion for the border fence. Pelosi and Schumer are saying absolutely no fence, directly contradicting their positions from only a few years back. But this is no longer about the budget. It's no longer about immigration. It's no longer about the fence. It's about one-upmanship. It's about who's going to be seen as coming out on top, who's going to win. And to heck with the rest of the country, to heck with those federal workers who are working or not working right now, not getting paid for it. It's all about personality. It's all about, I'm going to prove we're in charge here. But apparently Donald Trump is sending additional troops to the border to string 160 miles of concertina wire on top of the existing border fencing. Part of the problem is the border fence that was down there. It's been there for a while. Some of it's deteriorated, and we are seeing the migrants and illegal immigrants simply go up to the top of that fence, throw heavy padding or blankets over the existing razor wire that's there, which is very small, and just crawl on over. Now, in the past, it wasn't really that big of a problem because the illegals weren't being intentionally lured here with promises of free stuff, and the Border Patrol was patrolling the border. But now it's out of control. So now they're putting up this multi-loop, really nasty razor wire. There's no way to put padding over that and get over it safely here. It's basically concertina wire. And so they're going to add another 160 miles of this wire, according to NPR. Now, President Trump put out a brilliant video on his Twitter account about the crisis at the border. It was just a montage of videos of the rioting migrants, the rioting illegal immigrants just trying to get around the Border Patrol. The Border Patrol are overwhelmed. They're outnumbered. And right in the middle of it is the clip of Schumer saying our borders must be secure. And I invite you to basically track it down on my webpage and retweet it out, send it out to people, because you know for certain the corporate media is not going to mention this at all. The corporate media, in fact, has yet to mention that both Schumer and Pelosi, only a few years ago, were in favor of better border security. But one corporate media reporter is taking a different position. CBS reporter Marcia Kramer caught up with Chuck Schumer and basically said, what about this flip-flop? Where previously you were saying you wanted border security that would put you in full agreement with President Trump today. And basically he came on out, Schumer's statement, this was on video. Illegal immigration is wrong, plain and simple. Until the American people are convinced we can stop future flows of illegal immigration, we will make no progress in dealing with the millions of illegal immigrants who are here now. So he changed his position. Well, back then he was advocating border control. This was 10 years ago because it was a hot button issue for the American people. The situation now is the Democrats need those illegal immigrants. They need them to pour into GOP districts and turn them Democrat. They need them to vote, even though it's illegal. It doesn't matter that it's illegal to the Democrats. To heck with the laws. We just want to win. We want to stay in power. We have this liberal dream of a utopian paradise. And we have to get rid of the conservatives to make it happen. Up in Middleton, Delaware, they have an annual parade every New Year's Day, and it's called the Hummers Parade, and it began in 1971 as a spoof of Philadelphia's Mummers Parade, and mummer is an Old English word for a mime or a dancer or something like that. And unfortunately, this last Hummers Parade, they had a float portraying children in cages at the U.S. border, which promptly drew criticism from politicians and community activists who said this was way, way over the line. Okay. All right. Over in Great Britain, they're starting to face the reality that the Brexit is going to be a hard Brexit. And the British police are starting to have drills because they're expecting that a no-deal Brexit is going to trigger all kinds of unrest. And they're probably correct. I expect the Brexiteers will be very calm, but the Remainers, they're going to be sore losers because most of them are liberals. And if you remember how the liberals responded when Hillary lost in 2016, yeah, there's likely to be violence. And so they're starting the training for dealing with riots this month. They've set aside 1,000 officers, and so has Northern Ireland. And they're setting in emergency supplies, so they're concerned that there's going to be disruption there. The BBC is being accused of risking public violence, possibly inciting it. This is coming from Comment Central in Great Britain. And it's basically saying that the British public, who basically pay a fee for the BBC, are aware that BBC has been incredibly biased in its coverage of the Brexit debate. And the British people are aware they're not getting both sides of the story. And David Hardy is out there saying that if the British people had confidence in BBC, if they had confidence in that they were getting both sides of the debate, that anger might be avoided. But when you have a no-deal Brexit and you know that the BBC has been lying to you as well, the only reaction you have left is being angry, losing your temper. Okay. Over in Germany, their major right-wing party, the Alternative for Germany Party, is now threatening to push for a Dexit, a Deutschland exit, if the EU does not restore its members' national sovereignty, and if the EU does not take action against the Islamization of Europe within the next 5 years. So the AfD came on out basically saying the European community has evolved into an undemocratic structure that's been occupied by Europe's political classes and designed by non-transparent, uncontrolled bureaucracies. So we're back to talking about a Dexit, or a Grexit if you prefer. I'm sorry, that would be Greece. A Jexit. Dexit. They just want to leave. That's what's going on. They just want to leave here. Apparently over in Germany, towns have started organizing their own citizens patrol groups because of all the migrant attacks on locals. And apparently this was sparked by a recent drunken rampage of a group of teenage migrants in the Bavarian town of Amberg, which I've actually been to. And as a result, citizens groups are organizing to basically go on out for their own protection. The police can't handle it, or they won't handle it, or they're being ordered not to handle it. There are still sections of the government there that are saying, yes, open borders good, globalism good. Up in Sweden, they are putting people in jail just for criticizing migration. There's this online hate speech monitoring group. I cannot even begin to pronounce it, but the head of this group, Thomas Aberg, gets tax money for scanning social media and reporting pensioners and any others who write critically about migration on Facebook. And apparently they're now claiming they've had almost 150 hate speech convictions. So there's not much freedom in Sweden. If there's no freedom of speech, you don't have freedom. That's basically it. That's what it comes down to. Over in Italy, Salvini is saying that the mayors of Palermo, Florence, and Naples hate Italians, and they should resign because they're all in favor of open borders. They're welcoming in the illegal immigrants and the migrants, and apparently somehow they're actually cashing in on it. They're making money off of it. And apparently the former mayor of the Calabrian town of Rais is currently under house arrest on charges of aiding and abetting illegal immigration. See, Italy has their version of Title VIII. They're starting to enforce it. If we enforced our Title VIII, we could really start shutting down this whole problem. We wouldn't need Trump's wall. We wouldn't need $5.6 billion. Just cut off that financial incentive. Stop handing out food stamps. Stop handing out free this, free that. Start prosecuting people who are aiding and abetting the illegal immigrants. And again, I'm not being racist here because illegal is not a race. If somebody comes to this country through the legal citizenship process, like that poor police officer in California who got gunned down and killed by an illegal immigrant, they are welcome here. Come on in. I hope we're not too much of a disappointment to you. We're not dealing with racism. We're dealing with criminal activity. Plus, it's also a public health issue. There are a lot of highly contagious diseases being just flooded into this country. And I'm sure the medical industrial complex just thinks that's great. Oh, we're going to sell more medications. We're going to sell more testing instruments. We're going to sell more hospital supplies. We're all going to get rich off of this. Back in, well, December of last year, a Baltimore lawyer filed a lawsuit against the Southern Poverty Law Center, which really isn't all that much about poverty or law. And apparently the SPLC targeted Glenn Keith Allen over his former ties to the National Alliance, which is a white nationalist group. Now, he hasn't been part of that group for a long time, and he says he regrets being connected with it. But in doing so, the SPLC violated laws and legal conducts of code by receiving and then paying for stolen documents in violation of confidentiality agreements. And the group went after Allen with the intent of getting him fired by the city of Baltimore and permanently destroying his future prospects. And that, unfortunately, is becoming a tactic of the ultra-liberals, to not just get you fired from your current job, to just destroy you. So you'll have to spend the rest of your life mopping floors for a living. We got to take a break for commercials. Back with the show in a few minutes. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're still not able to get our text window to work. So we're still not going to be able to take. All right, I'll tell you what. We're going to take one caller before the top of the hour, and the Lady Claire. Alan in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. I want to talk a little bit about global warming. You'd mentioned before that you took flight training, and you probably remember there's a thing that pilots know about called density altitude.
Yes, of course.
Basically, for most people, what that means is when the air gets hot, it's as if you're at a higher altitude. And so it's very important for pilots to be aware of what the density altitude is to maintain
because
aircraft
you calculate
safety.
your stall speeds from that.
Excellent. And I remember when I was in flight school, my instructor deliberately took me up on a really, really hot day so that I could see how the plane performs. It takes more fuel, it takes longer to climb. Anyway, my point is that if there really was global warming, wouldn't there be enormous statistics coming from the pilots and the, information? Because this is critical for safe flying. So if it really was getting hotter, there'd be more fuel expended. The pilots would have to change, what they're doing, how they operate the airplane. And so that's, they talk about science. And it's like, well, there's a lot of science here. I don't hear any pilots talking about.
The problem here is that when they come out with headlines like snowfalls are a thing of the past, which they did back in 2000, when you actually get down to the claims being made by the global warming people, they're talking about 4 degrees over the next century. And so any warming that's taking place is so minor that it's probably going to be lost in the statistical noise of any analysis of the aviation records. So again, there's a lot of hype and not a lot of science. But you're absolutely right. If there was serious global warming, it would adversely affect the fuel loads on these aircraft, and that would drive up the cost of airline tickets.
Anyway, that was my point. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and we're going to close the phone lines again because we're coming up on the top of the hour, and the lovely Lady Claire. And again, the PC liberal snowflake whiners are out there. Now they're attacking the reruns of the popular sitcom Seinfeld as being offensive. Now, the show aired from 1989 to 1998, and it was very popular. But today, everybody's out there saying, "Oh, this is terrible here. He's offensive." And show fans are hitting on back and saying that, look, today's culture is just too politically correct. And times have changed since the show aired. And you really can't judge what happened, what was shot back then or written back then, based on what you've come up with today. But that's a big part of the liberal snowflake thing. We're going to define what society ought to be right now today and then judge everything that's happened in history by it, which is completely unrealistic. Okay, there's the music. Time for us to do a quick station identification. We'll be back with the lovely Lady Claire after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3, and our text window, unfortunately, is still down, so we're not going to be taking phone calls for hour number 3. But for those of you watching on YouTube, this gorgeous creature sitting to my side is the lovely Lady Claire, who likes to join us every Friday at hour number 3. So, Lady Claire, what's the first thing that you want to talk about?
Well, the first thing that I think...
Whoops, probably would help if I turned up your volume.
Thank you, dear.
Boy, what a bad tech day we're having here.
Yeah, it's going to be okay. Apparently, Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu said that Israel is acting at a military level amid U.S. sanctions on Iran. And we believe that he's talking about that sortie where something was hit in Syria, not sure quite what. And he was addressing Israeli military cadets yesterday. And he apparently meant strikes against what Israel calls Iranian positions in Syria. Now, Damascus is saying that the attacks are part of Israel's efforts to prop up terrorists in the face of army advances. But there was a bit of a bombshell that happened last week because Tel Aviv had claimed that there was a recent air raid in Syria, that it had targeted Iranian military advisors in Hezbollah, but the attack actually hit Syrian army positions. And
well, there's a big whoopsie.
Yeah, hello, And the one thing that is going to make this very sticky, and I hope that saner heads in Israel, perhaps Netanyahu's generals, will survive on this, because we're talking about the 19,000-pound gorilla sleeping on the Bösendorfer, and that's Russia. Now, what happens the first time Russia has something that is... Oh, thank you. Thank you. I didn't realize. And what happens the first time the Israeli fighters hit the Russian? I'm very concerned about that. How do we do it? How did they do it?
Well, it is a big issue there, and for Israel to have struck Syrian army forces, I'm rather surprised Assad did not do anything in response, because supposedly Russia had greenlit Syria for retaliatory attacks by Israel into Syria. But I think Assad is trying to play it cool right now, because I think he understands, especially with Trump's announced pullout from Syria, that Israel wants to escalate the war. Israel does not want to give back the Golan.
Yeah.
And Israel, I think, understands that once the U.S. is gone from Syria, Syria may want to start taking back some of the territory that was carved off of them by Israel, by Turkey, and so forth.
Yeah. And there was a very interesting article in Press TV, which, as you know, is an Iranian outlet in English. And by the way, if you haven't seen it, guys, go look. You may not agree with some positions that might be taken, but I figure it's always useful to know what someone else is thinking. And this article said that Trump is ignoring Tel Aviv's demands about Syria. And the U.S. President Trump has made recent statements, apparently, that the Israeli officials were not happy about, which was the immediate withdrawal.
Well, Trump's already waffling on that and saying it may be months, and there are more and more people out there saying that it's not really going to happen. Chuck Baldwin, he said it's just a hoax. Trump is lying to the American people about this.
Yeah. And the statement was made in response to Trump's remarks, which some Israeli media outlets described as American policy change on Syria, where Trump, and I remember hearing this, I think you did too, Iran is pulling people out of Syria, but they can frankly do whatever they want there. Now, here's a very different thought that I have. And when you talk about geopolitics, Mike, as you know, timing of events is never accidental. Now, as most of you know who are listening and reading, right now, Israel's Bibi Netanyahu is in the political fight of his life.
Yes.
Because he doesn't know if Israel's AG is going to indict him for corruption. And I mean, this man, I really pity this guy because
I don't.
No. The Attorney General did not.
That guy.
The AG.
Okay.
Because what has happened to this guy, his family's dad's grave got desecrated. I can't even get my hands around how something so nasty could be done. But I guess they were trying to send the message that if you prosecute him, you're going to be in deep kimchi.
Yeah, I think that's the message they were sending.
Yeah.
And in that culture, grave desecration is a very, very major thing.
Oh, it's just, I mean, I can't get my hands around it. If you have something to say to someone, say it honestly, try to say it kindly, but this, oof. So what I think has happened is that Israel has given Trump his marching orders, which is why we're seeing a slowdown of the withdrawal of American troops. And that's supposed to be happening in 90 days, which conveniently dovetails into the time between the moment the Knesset, or Israel's parliament, was dismissed. And elections are due to be called on April 9th. And I think we have a little something
we have to
say.
do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Well, so here's what we need to ask ourselves. Netanyahu right now is not polling very well.
No, he's not.
Okay, so what could the United States or Israel do relative to Syria that would reverse that? I mean, Netanyahu's always seen himself as a wartime leader, and that may be the reason that they went on in and fired on Syrian army positions to try and provoke Assad into doing something.
And what I think President Trump has done here has been able to give Netanyahu 90 days in which he can do whatever he wants militarily, perhaps in Gaza, Syria, Iran, or Lebanon, so that the guy looks uber butch to the voters coming out on April 9th.
Well, that would actually make sense because with the Knesset dissolved, Netanyahu's appointed himself Minister of Defense when the previous gentleman resigned.
Right.
So Netanyahu's basically a one-person government.
Yep.
And he's being described as the king of Israel.
And what I think we may be on the cutting edge of is a March-April Israeli surprise. The thing that he's got to think about, though, if any of these actions come off badly, he may well have sealed his fate at the ballot box. What do you think?
It depends on, who sold the ballot box to him. If it's Diebold, he's got nothing to worry about.
Of course not. And there was a very interesting story in Sputnik. And there's a gentleman by the name of Kaiser who does a lot of writing and radio for them. And I respect what this guy has to say. And he's asking a question. What is behind the U.S. labeling China as a threat? And what if the trade talks fail? Now, we know that China can make cheaper goods and equipment. We also know that they're able to build telephonic devices that can't get spied on. And Michael Hudson was talking to Artis Max Kaiser, and he was making this prediction that if the negotiations do not go well, the world is going to split into two halves, and if the powers fail to settle their row.
Well, back to a bipolar world and a new Cold War.
Yeah. And see, the thing is, apparently China manufactures its own chips, among other high technology equipment, making that kind of mission, i.e. spying, impossible.
Well, that's a big part of what's going on with this Huawei. With the CFO. NSA is very angry that the Huawei cell phones, which are they're big sellers. Huawei makes a lot of cell phones. They may carry other companies' brand names on the outside, but they're made by Huawei, and their encryption the NSA can't break.
Yeah. And so Hudson was saying that China is making telephones and computer equipment that we can't spy on, and they're calling that a threat to the U.S. national security. I am hoping and praying that things at this meeting go well, guys, because if not, we could well be looking at the results of this fracturing world and in a world war.
Yes, that's always the risk. Now, I'm sure that pretty much everybody within the military-industrial complex is out there saying, no, we did a balancing act the last time with the Cold War. We got all this money. We built all these junk weapons that we never had to use. It was a huge scam, and we can do it again. Well, that's not entirely true. There were a couple of near misses. Like there was one mechanical failure
Mhm.
that sent out the signal we were under Russian attack, and
Oh,
it got
boy.
within minutes of a counter launch before, thankfully, some human intervened and said,
Yeah.
no, this makes no sense.
This is not happening.
and
Yeah.
basically pulled the plug.
Mhm.
Then, of course, there was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh, yes.
And again, for those of you who've seen the movie War Games,
Mhm.
that was based on an actual incident as well at
Mhm.
Cheyenne Mountain, where somebody fed a training tape into the computer system and didn't make the announcement it was
Oh,
a training exercise.
Lord, yes.
And everybody
Yeah.
thought they were under attack.
Mhm.
So there were near misses. And today, with all these computerized
Mhm.
systems,
Yep.
you know, these computers could launch something unfortunate before humans even had a chance to intervene.
Yeah.
Which is what happened with the USS Vincennes shooting down that Iranian passenger jet,
Yep.
and the accidental shoot down of TWA 800.
Right, right. So I'm hoping that everyone stays calm and comes up with what I call a moral and financial win for both countries, because, you know, that ultimately is what's going to keep both countries alive financially and keep them busy.
Unfortunately, we have too many players on the world stage, especially here in the United States, whose attitude is, it is not enough that we succeed, everybody else must fail, which I think goes back to Attila the Hun.
Yeah, something like that. Would like to also talk about China because of something that they're doing that is breathtakingly remarkable, but maybe not in a good way. And apparently, the government of China has been parading re-educated Uyghur Muslims on state TV to extol their prison camps. And previously, last year, I mean, China was just blowing this off. It's not happening. The Uyghur Muslims are just fine, yada, 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 deny, deny, deny. But apparently, there's been a lot of serious work. And now China is doing something so Western. I mean, it's ironic. It just makes you laugh. They're attempting to shift the negative to one that is a positive de-radicalization program.
Well, one person's
Yeah.
prison is another person's educational center.
Yeah.
And again, there is so much propaganda being put on out there.
Yeah.
To demonize China. We have to be very, very cautious about what's going on.
Oh, I agree.
Now, we're already hearing in Europe where there are calls for de-radicalization centers
Yeah.
for some of the more dangerous Muslims who are there. And it would actually make sense. What is China supposed to do? Allow these very violent, fanatical people to just roam free over the countryside?
Can't be done. I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
I mean, look at what's happened all over Europe. And how unhappy those people are.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that the U.S. is going to point at China and say, bad China, bad China. But again, the U.S. really is not in a position to criticize based on the internment camps of World War II.
No.
Which were all over the American West, and there was even one right here on the island of Oahu. And believe it or not, that whole project was under the command of General Patton. Before he went off to join the war in Africa, he was the guy who set up all of these internment centers and rounded up the Asians and threw them in there.
And we also have that issue of private prison labor.
Yes.
That's ugly to me. And it's very frustrating. There are countries that are, let's say, doing an enlightened approach to what happens in incarceration.
Yes.
And the recidivism rate way down. And it just strikes me as mysterious why the U.S. doesn't want to learn from other countries that are having better outcomes that can be statistically borne out.
Because crime is big business in this country. I mean, the police departments justify bigger budgets by having a lot of crime in the streets. Home security systems doing big business because of crimes in the streets. And the government basically uses the high crime rate as one of the many tools to keep the American people scared and easier to control. Cower in your homes and, don't forget to dial 911, but the bad guys are out there, so don't you dare go on out there and join that yellow vest march. You might get mugged.
Oh, boy. We need to also go back to China, and apparently, and I didn't know this until today, Mike, Beijing has detained 13 Canadians since the arrest of the YY CFO. And now the U.S. government has published the latest travel advisory. And how they're putting this is they are saying that there could be arbitrary law enforcement risks they could face in China and some remedies to take. But you have to wonder why now, with trade negotiations set to begin in earnest next week. One would think that the U.S. wouldn't want to kick the hornet's nest. Although, in fairness, the DOJ's steady stream of indictments against Chinese government-sponsored hackers have continued, as has the prosecution of Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou.
Well, there are people who do not want the trade talks to continue. I mean, Trump basically is taking a very aggressive hardline posture with the Chinese. The NSA wants Huawei brought to heel and open up their encryption. And again, hostilities are building over there in the Western Pacific. And we're poking at the dragon. There was the arrest of the Huawei CFO. There's the sponsorship of Taiwan in support of Taiwanese independence. There's the continuing encroachments down there in the islands in the South China Sea. These are not the actions of a country that is seeking to restore peaceful relations with a foreign nation.
It looks to me like the Canadian-Chinese relationships are just about as strained as are the U.S.-China relationships, nearly to the breaking point. But I'm hoping that some of the adults in the room in Beijing and Ottawa will get this sorted before more unhappiness ensues in both countries for this kind of behavior.
I have to be honest, I think China erred in grabbing so many Canadians. I know they're trying to make a point saying, you know, you're going to arrest one of ours because the CFO had not broken any Canadian laws. Canada simply arrested her at the request of the United States. And they're getting ready to send her on down there. And that's a very dangerous precedent where any country on earth can ask any other country on earth to arrest somebody and ship them home. Borders are supposed to be kind of solid against that sort of thing unless there's a treaty of extradition. But again, Canada's arrest of the CFO really was illegal under Canadian law. She hadn't done anything. And I think she and her husband own property in Canada as well. They have a very nice house. Well, she was regularly traveling back and forth, on Huawei business, and yes, they had a very nice property there. I think it's in Vancouver. And the husband is still there, I think. Actually, she's there now. She's not in jail anymore, but she is wearing an ankle bracelet, subject to 24-hour monitoring. But again, these are not the actions of a government that wants to be friends with China. It's one provocation after the other, after the other. And again, the arrest of the CFO of Huawei may not have come from the Trump administration itself, but been initiated by the NSA. Wouldn't be the first time a government agency's gone rogue to say, we need to do X, Y, Z. And at this point, I have to say, Trump does not feel like he's really in charge. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are out there with this border wall thing, trying to basically establish a new pecking order with themselves at the top. And this gets back to that ridiculous interview Nancy Pelosi did in the New York Times in which she claims, erroneously I might add, that the Constitution states that the Speaker of the House is the equal to the President, which it does not.
What Constitution was she reading?
I have no idea. It's not the one that I have here. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go ahead and try and take a phone call here from Ken in Fort Worth. Aloha, Ken. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Howdy, howdy. Hey, Smedley Butler had a book called, or he has a book called, well, if I can read it.
War's a Racket.
Yeah, that's it. Also, there's a book called Plot to Seize the White House by Jules Archer about him.
Yeah.
And that tells everything you need to know about him. And anyway, there's two of them out there floating around anyway. People pick up.
Well, we've I think War's a Racket is actually on the web. And you can hunt it down and read it there. It's actually not all that long. It's more of a treatise than a book. But Smedley Butler basically spent his life in the Marine Corps, started at the bottom, worked his way on up to become a major general. At one point was in charge of training for the entire Marine Corps. And he never did or said anything political. He just played by the rules. But once he retired, he looked back over his career and realized what it was he'd really been doing. And that's when he wrote War is a Racket. Pardon me.
Yeah, good point. Trying to think. He was a major in 1900.
Yes.
And it sounds like that they were going to have a plot to steal, take over the White House, and he stopped it.
Well, he pretended, we mentioned this earlier in the show, he pretended to go along with it to gather evidence of the coup d'etat, and then he blew the whistle to Roosevelt, but Roosevelt was really powerless to do anything because the bankers said, we've got your New Deal economy by the throat. You arrest one of us, we'll wreck it, and the corporate media will say it was all your fault, because they hated him. They hated his New Deal. And it was all covered up and hushed up until the 1970s. But, Roosevelt got his revenge because on the day World War II broke out, he nailed quite a few of those bankers, quite a few of those coup plotters under the Trading with the Enemies Act, because they all had business interests with Nazi Germany. Companies like Brown Brothers Harriman. Mm-hmm. And so he got his revenge eventually.
Yeah, because that was back during the bonus march in '32 when MacArthur was told to clean it up, and I guess Eisenhower was aide-de-camp at the time.
I'm not sure if I recall that much detail about that particular period.
I've seen a picture of Eisenhower with MacArthur, and supposedly it was at the bonus march in '32. Anyway, snoop around, you can hunt some of that and find some of this stuff out.
Well, I have, unfortunately, a sincere desire to focus on things that are happening right here and now, because I don't want to see a mushroom cloud out that window over there, which is looking, sadly, more and more likely. Anything else?
Well, I'm going to tell you one more quick thing. You know that Pocahontas wants to run for president, right?
Yes,
Warren.
Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Anyway, the New American Magazine has a Freedom Index. And time ago, she got 0, and Ted Cruz got 92. But anyway, in the Fort Worth Star Telegram, they gave her 7 columns. All it would take is 2x2 article for news.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
They could have plenty more room for more news.
All right. Well, listen, we're going to let you go now. And we're going to
okay.
Have a good evening. Have a good evening. And we're going to switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. And Dustin, I'm going to have to take you through this next commercial break. What's on your mind?
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Brown and Harriman, Union Bank, Prescott Bush. That's where they got their fortune from.
Yeah.
Nazi war machine.
Yep.
Great bushes, huh?
Yep.
What a joke they are.
Oh.
Yeah. And the Clintons, they get it from death and destruction, man.
And the drug trade.
I don't know how you guys. Yeah, Mike, I don't know how you guys put up with it. I mean, it's just like day after day, the same crap. You know what I mean? It's just like this whole. Yeah, I keep hearing, with Trump's only in 2 years we defeated ISIS. No, we all know the Russians and the Iranians defeated ISIS.
Yeah, Syria, Russia, and Iran defeated ISIS. You know, the only thing that happened is that the United States, which was caught supporting ISIS, had to cut off that support because it was becoming an international embarrassment.
Yeah. And one other answer I would share with you. Justin, we know for whom we are fighting, all of us, in the most peaceful and logical way. And there are times when I will see a feel-good story, and I will email it to Mike, and I will remind him, these are the people we're fighting for, even if they don't know it. So that's sort of where my headspace is.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And we're basically fighting against tyranny, which is any system in which you have a ruling elite that sits there living lives of luxury on the backs of the people beneath them. Anyway, we've got to take a break for commercials. Dustin, stay on the line. I'm going to come right back to you. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking with Dustin in New Jersey. Dustin, what else have you got for us?
I wanted to continue that woman that was just sworn in.
Yes.
That said, Trump, we're going to impeach you, MFer. This is what they're saying in public. I just want people to think about this. What do you think they're telling in private? Just like that Republican.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Remember that Republican that come out and said tax cuts for regular people, all they'll spend it on is what, booze and prostitutes. Remember?
I remember that one.
Think.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep. This is how they live in another world where they're isolated.
Yes.
A lot of people just don't understand that. They just, it's like they live in a gated community, even though some of them may not mean behind the gates. That's their mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And you're never going to change it. And it's not about her being a Muslim saying that or Jewish. Like the guy last week called. He had a couple phone calls, which I think were just planted there.
Yeah. I
but
agree.
It's an ideology of like neoliberal, neocon globalism.
Mm-hmm.
They believe in this ideology, and it's like, and unfortunately, the serfs. That's what we are. The serfs. Have to deal with the brunt of this crap.
We're expected to work and produce the wealth, and they just take it, and then they play their little games with it. That's tyranny.
Yep. Claire, on the Uyghur thing, I told Mark from North Carolina about this. This whole million Uyghurs being in concentration camps it was a bogus story. Now there's thousands of Uyghurs like in these re-education camps, because I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago there was an incident in because they have a problem with the Uyghurs, some of the extremist parts of it.
Yeah.
They had somebody went through a train station with a machete and they killed like 100 people.
Oh wow, that was horrible. Yeah. I hear you on that, but it's kind of interesting that the Chinese government is trying to change the focus from being incarcerated to learning new emotional and social skills, which may not be a bad thing. Well, they may very well be
doing that.
Yeah,
they may very well be doing that. Remember, everything. Well, it all depends. I mean, you're never going to change a fanatic. But remember, the whole original principle of emigration any place else was assimilation into that society. Remember what Teddy Roosevelt said about coming to the United States. And the fanatics are never going to change, but they're not all fanatics. Very few of them are. In fact, I've got a simple question for you. How do you tell the fanatical Muslims from the non-fanatical Muslims?
By their actions. Non-fanatical are going to treat people well, no matter what background they come from.
Every Muslim I've known, and I've known quite a few, I never had a problem with.
Yeah.
They were wonderful people. I've never met a Muslim fanatic. I've met a lot of Christian fanatics.
So have I. So have I.
The congresswoman, you think she is fanatical? Because not as a Muslim, but as a globalist, they're fanatical. They
may
assault
well
people.
be.
Majority of these people are assaulting people. I mean, very few Trump supporters are. I'm a Democrat. I voted for Trump. But I mean, what I mean? Like, very few Trump supporters are. Even though they claim that's the opposite on the news, it's a majority of these people are assaulting the Trump supporters.
Yes,
they're
they
the
are.
fanatics.
They absolutely are. Now, regarding this congresswoman, somebody sent in an article. It's a flashback from earlier in the campaign, right after she won the primaries. And as it turns out, she is, in fact, a strong supporter of Israel and supports increased military funding for Israel as well. So that's, we see your true colors shining through.
Definitely.
We see your true colors shining through.
Hey, Mike, if she said this about King Salman in Saudi Arabia, she would have been stoned to death, right?
Well, a lot of people seem to think so, yes.
And it's just sad, all these people, the neocons, neoliberal, they all are on the war, for all the wars, and also arming the jihadists. The same with Germany, in Britain, France, Trudeau in Canada, they bring them back, the white helmets. It's the same group of people. I mean, they're insane.
Yep.
You know, I mean, I don't know what else to say about it. It's like, I mean, it's like Bizarro world. And
Well,
it's
you
going to
know,
get worse. That was my 2019 prediction.
Okay, these jihadi groups need to understand something. The United States, or the Western powers in general, will support them and train them and arm them only so long as they're useful. And then after they're no longer useful, they're going to be dropped and abandoned. And it's certainly not the first time this is going to happen. That's a lot of what's going on in Syria. These jihadi groups who are getting wiped out now by the Syrian army and Russia and Iran are being wiped out because their support lines have been cut off because of the change in U.S. policy in Syria. And like I said, not the first time in history it's happened, but I wish some of these groups like the White Helmets would realize they may be friends today, but that does not make them friends tomorrow.
And then, Mike, real quick, China, with Huawei, you hear all like the talk. Remember how the stock market was tanking because of Apple? Apple can't compete with Huawei. Remember, I saw a lot of analysts saying Apple needs to drop their prices because of Huawei, you know, and 5G and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
It's all about economics.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about national security. Is about economics, right? That's what it comes down to.
Everybody can look at any aspect of our society and say it's a threat to national security, a threat to the dollar, the de-dollarization. That's a threat to our national security. Communications we can't intercept is a threat to our national security. The heavy snow coming down from the north is a threat to our national security. It's a very loosey-goosey term that's used for pretty much declaring anything to be a crisis without having to justify the actions that follow. Every time the government wants to cover something up, they just come in and say, oh, it's national security. That's the magic word that says back off and don't touch. You're in, terra incognita.
Isn't it amazing? The stock market is going crazy because we got low Hispanic. They use the same thing. We had low black, unemployment. It's all bogus numbers. The unemployment rate
we know
is high.
it is. We know. Were you listening to the show earlier? Because we talked about how looking at the futures markets last night, it was obvious somebody was doing a push-up. Gold was being dumped. Futures were being bought. That's where it all came from. It's manufactured. It looks beautiful, and I'm sure the money junkies are going to go to bed happy tonight. But it's an illusion. The stock markets are completely, totally disconnected from the real world economy. But the corporate media and the government are going to go on using those stock market numbers as a banner to wave in front of your eyes to say, see, the economy's doing really good. And if you're going hungry or homeless or whatever, it has to be your fault. You can't blame the government or the bankers for your impoverishment. Well, yeah, that's who's impoverishing us.
Mike, if Apple was doing so great here, how come they're based on what China is buying Apple phone-wise? How come they weren't basing on what Apple phones are selling here? They're selling more Apple phones in China, which means our market is either saturated or nobody's buying the phones here. So China slowed down, so that's why Apple's tank stock, right?
Well, yeah, no, it's a blame China situation. I mean, Apple iPhone sales with the iPhone 10 were down all across the globe. Tim Cook absolutely misjudged what was going on in the world. He just thought that because loyal Apple customers had always upgraded to the latest phone every time they came out with a new one, they would do so again. But given the economic realities, people are they're hanging onto their old iPhones. In some cases, there are small businesses starting up that will repair the older iPhones, keep them running for you. And people are choosing to go in that direction. The iPhone 10 was a huge jump in price, up to like $1,000, and it really didn't provide any significant innovations to make our lives better. Yeah, they had the animojis and that little face camera, but there wasn't really a whole heck of a lot that justified that additional money. And the days of buying the latest and greatest tech just to be able to say, I bought the latest and greatest tech, those are gone for the foreseeable future because people just don't have the money.
And nobody used 90% of those applications on there.
Well, I noticed that when I got my first iPhone. The first month there, I was playing with everything, and I do have a lot of apps I use, like the weather radar and stuff like that. Anyway, Dustin, got to let you go here. We've got another caller waiting patiently on the line. We're getting close to the end of the show. We're going to switch to Gary in Arkansas. Aloha, Gary. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I got a couple of quick comments. I heard on another program that regarding this wall problem, Saudi Arabia has a wall that's not on the ground; it's in the sky. They lined the border with these balloons with all high tech equipment in them that have a footprint of 200 miles.
Yes.
So I'm sure you could buy enough of those balloons. That's off-the-shelf technology to take care of the problem there in Mexico. And then a couple of callers back, talked about one part of the society pushing away economically, basically, from another part of the society, which is us common folks. Now, there's a term for that. It's called the breakaway society.
Yes.
Now, the idea behind that, I think, is they want to get us into a nuclear war with these bombs have very little radioactivity, the clean ones do. Neutron bombs don't have anything.
Whoa, no, wait a minute. I have to correct you on that. Neutron bombs, the neutron enhancement bomb, is a weapon designed specifically to kill everything in an enemy city without doing all that much damage to the buildings. It's a weapon of invasion.
That's what I said, what I was getting to.
Okay.
But the idea is to have enough underground bunkers for the select choice few, rich, and then all us poor guys will be fighting for the scraps above ground, and then they'll send troops out to mop up so they can come out of their bunkers. Because, if I saw a guy that was in a bunker and was leaving me to fend for myself on the top, I know what I'd do, and it wouldn't be pretty.
Well, I'm not going to be fighting for scraps. I mean, if that were really to come up to pass, I'm going to find the nearest bunker and cement over the hatch. Just put a big plywood form over there and, get a big old cement truck and just cement over that hatch so it can't be opened. Just let them stay on down there until they run out of air and food and water. And they'll be eating each other.
Yep.
Okay?
Well, that's all I got.
All right, Gary, thanks. Bye-bye, Gary, thanks. We're going to let you go, and let's see if we have another caller waiting on the line. And it looks like we do not. So, Claire, back to you.
One thing that they were doing on Fox a few minutes ago is that Maduro is being requested to resign by some of his big people.
Well, I don't think it said diplomats.
Okay.
Diplomats, meaning this is pressure from the outside. Yeah.
And it looks as though Russia is going to help Venezuela in a number of ways. They've signed some trade agreements and such, and I frankly don't think that we have much game there right now in terms of being able to change the government.
Well, the goal there isn't so much to change the government. The goal there is to get Venezuela to sell their oil only for the U.S. dollar.
Yeah.
Because right now the U.S. government, the banking system is in a panic as more and more countries are doing trade without going through that dollar. So we don't get our little mafia-like piece of the action. And we don't have a whole heck of a lot else holding up what's left of our economy.
No.
We don't have a lot of strong manufacturing. Trump is trying to bring that back with his tariffs. I don't think it's working as well as he claims it is.
No.
And, of course, nobody wants our agricultural produce because of this disastrous experiment with genetically modified organisms.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, getting the world back to Bretton Woods, getting the rest of the world to use our particular brand of ink and paper for their for their business, and we get a piece of that action. Basically, the United States wants to transition to a nation that lives off the commerce of the rest of the world. A parasite, if you will.
Yeah, but that's already not working because you've got countries like China, like India, and like Russia who are saying we're just sort of going to ignore.
Well, that's why they're demonizing Russia and China. They're trying to cut off any more nations from switching sides, but it's not working. The more our government bullies these other nations, and I should stop saying it's our government. It's the more the government of the United States bullies and arm twists these other nations, the faster they move away from us. And I can almost smell panic there in the halls of power.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why they're all acting so wacky there in the Congress.
I had a really interesting thing happen, and stop me if I've mentioned this before, but we have a couple of net buddies who occasionally will send us videos, et cetera, et cetera. And the last one they sent was a Russian police officers vocal association. And these, I say kids because I turned 70 this year, these kids sang beautifully in English with a better grasp of American pronunciation than some of the people I talked to on the phone for my marketing. And I remember looking at those faces and they were smiling and it was all in English. These guys are not my enemies.
Nope.
You know, in fact, I may have to find out who their conductor is and send them a copy of the website.
That's true.
What the heck? Reckless abandon.
Yeah. Claire's always looking for new choirs to do her original music.
Yeah.
Plug, 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 plug,
Yes, yes.
You know, it comes on down to this. We're all grown-ups here. We're all adults here.
Yeah.
We're perfectly capable of deciding for ourselves who our enemies and who our friends are.
Yeah.
I don't need the government to tell me that I have to hate these people over here and love and support these people over here. Yeah. That's not the government's job. It's nowhere in the Constitution. I've read it, apparently more than Nancy Pelosi has.
Oh, amen to that.
All right. All right, we're coming up on our final commercial break for the show today, and when we come back to the last segment on our Pau Hana Friday, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, final segment on this Pau Hana Friday program, and been a bit of a doozy. Look, this is our first week of 2019. Everyone's always walking around saying Happy New Year, but so far it's looking pretty much like the old year.
Yeah.
And yes, there was a change in the leadership of the House of Representatives. And as so many of the callers today have commented, their behavior it's embarrassing to the American people. From that new congresswoman who you said we're going to impeach the MF, referring to Donald Trump, to Nancy Pelosi and the leadership, the very first things they do, with all the problems we have in this country, the first things they do, they go after Donald Trump. They pass that spending bill that they know is a non-starter because they're grandstanding. They want the media attention. They're hoping that the media is going to convince the American people to call into Trump and say, please, please abandon the wall. We love our illegal immigrants and our migrants. We love being raped, and we love all these new contagious diseases we've never seen before. It's a thrilling adventure to come down with scabies. And I don't know that that's going to work. The polls are showing the American people overwhelmingly want that border sealed. They want the illegal immigrant problem solved. And that means sealing off the border and deportations.
Yeah.
Because these people are not supposed to be here. They are here illegally, and that's the word you have to keep in your mind. Illegal. They are illegals. They have broken the law. The instant they set foot across that border without the permission of this country, without the permission of the American people, for that matter.
Oh, absolutely.
They're criminals.
Mm-hmm.
And we already have enough criminals in our society and in our government.
Yes.
So,
absolutely.
But at this point, it's very obvious that we have the irresistible force hitting the immovable object. And again, this is no longer about immigration or the economy or the budget or humanitarianism or anything. This is Schumer and Pelosi and Trump basically trying to see who's top dog.
Yeah.
they're fighting for position.
Yeah.
And it's all about ego, and it's all about bragging rights. And of course, if Trump backs down on that wall, it's going to be another major blow against him and his administration.
Yeah.
It's going to be another indicator that he's not in control, that he is unable to keep his campaign promises. And no doubt the Democrats will use this going into 2020. Now, it's entirely possible this could also backflash on the Democrats, because Americans are watching this very, very closely. Mm-hmm. And they're seeing that the House of Representatives is not behaving like the House of Representatives we have seen growing up. Basically, it's about 2 steps below a steel cage death match.
Yes, I think so.
You know, in my particular view. And, you know, I'd like to see Schumer and Pelosi and Trump maybe get into an arena with a couple of clubs, and whoever comes out alive, or at least conscious, sets our immigration policy.
Okay.
So we're coming up here on the end of the show, and I want to ask you all to stay tuned for John Stadmiller. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here at this program and share it with everybody that you know. Talk to them, email, postal mail, paper. Go back to that wood pulp stuff. Stay off of social media. It is getting more and more filtered every day. Now they're going after pro-gun activists. They're deplatforming them. So it's just a desert out there. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting. They need it. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. We need it. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.